Chéri Smith is a descendant of the Mi'kmaq Nation, a federally recognized tribe in the Northeast.
The Northeast tribes tend to be very checkerboarded. We don't have these big reserves, right? We have little pieces that are disjointed, and they tend to be, close to other city centers.
Back in 2016, Chéri visited another tribe, the Northern Cheyenne in Montana. The poverty she saw during that visit changed her life.
I was profoundly impacted by that visit. It pained me so much to see that this was so induced by the high costs of energy and the lack of access to anything other than fossil-fueled energy that was wielded by big corporations that did not have these tribes' best interests at heart. So that was the beginning of the epiphany.
At the time, she was head of workforce and training development at Solar City, which had launched the Give Power Foundation to install solar and storage systems in communities that lacked electricity. Chéri connected that team with the Northern Cheyenne. Then, in June of 2016, Tesla announced it was acquiring Solar City.
We were literally standing on the roof of the tribal building of the Northern Cheyenne, the Little Wolf Capitol building, installing a 100-kilowatt system. And we got the news that the merger was going to happen.
She had hoped Tesla would help fund a larger effort to electrify tribal lands, but she was given a flat no. Still, Chéri stayed on as Tesla's head of workforce strategy, but in her free time, she founded a nonprofit called the Alliance for Tribal Clean Energy. In 2018, after decades working in clean energy, she quit Tesla to focus on building the nonprofit.
I realized that I had a calling, that I could use the skills and my experience and the network that I had to help tribes to pursue clean energy as a means to mitigate poverty, build their resilience against climate change, and to restore economies that were lost through colonization. And I haven't looked back.
$14 billion. That's how much in subsidies and incentives the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act made available to tribal communities for climate resilience and clean energy programs. It's an eye-popping figure until you learn why those resources are so necessary. 14% of all Native American households on tribal lands still lack electricity. We're talking about more than 50,000 people. That kind of energy poverty can come as a shock, even to other Native people. It certainly did to Chéri Smith.
I recognized that there was this moment in time and we had to pivot. We had to make use of this moment in time and set up a team to help deploy as much of that money as possible.
This is With Great Power, a show about the people building the future grid today. I'm Brad Langley. Some people say utilities are slow to change, that they don't innovate fast enough. And while it might not always seem like the most cutting-edge industry, there are lots of really smart people working really hard to make the grid cleaner, more reliable, and customer-centric. Today, my guest is Chéri Smith, the founder and CEO of the Alliance for Tribal Clean Energy. Together, we dig into the complexities of using federal funds to build energy infrastructure on tribal land. We also get into how historical and present-day injustices make energy poverty worse for tribes. We start our conversation with a phone call Chéri received from Jigar Shah. They've known each other for over 20 years and worked together on solar energy workforce development at the Department of Energy. It was back in August of 2022, and Jigar was leading the DOE's Loan Programs Office. And just a quick note, at the time, her organization was called the Covenant Tribal Solar Initiative.
He called and said, the IRA is going to pass the House on Thursday. He's going to sign this on Tuesday. We need your help to let tribes know what's in this bill. And I cried. I broke down. It was like hope. I still get choked up thinking about it. Like, really? An administration of the U.S. government has had the foresight and the ethics to consider tribal nations as valuable as they are and direct all this funding. And so we wrote a white paper, and I realized that I had to change the focus of what Covenant was, which was grassroots projects and very important, demonstration projects in tribal communities to demonstrate the literal and figurative power of clean energy to transform communities and lives. And that's when, I changed the name to the Alliance, and we have since helped tribes to receive almost $500 million in federal funding for clean energy initiatives. That in itself, whether IRA goes away tomorrow, that's huge. And we're proud of it. But now the work comes to implement those projects.
Given the history of colonialism and realities of energy access on tribal lands today, how does the Alliance approach the concept of a just clean energy transition?
For centuries now, tribes have suffered the effects of colonization. And one of the ways that oppression has been exerted on tribes has been through the wielding of resources like energy. Largely the grid in our, the things that make up the grid in our country have been built on the backs of Native American tribes and on their lands without their consent. There's 500 kV lines going across so many reservations, and they're not even allowed to tap into them. And it's, those injustices are what we're trying to not repeat in this next build out of the grid. And so self-determination is key. And tribes they're sovereign nations. It's important for us to remember that, and that the tribes be allowed to make decisions that benefit them, and that we not have policies that hinder that. And tribes are really good partners for those looking to build utility scale projects, because of the land remaining in our country that's suitable for utility scale development, a great percentage of it rests on tribal lands. Our job, we find ourselves in that position if we're asked by the tribes to be in that position of buffer between developers, between the feds and the tribes, between other kinds of service providers, between utilities and the tribes. And that's where our subject matter experts come in, and our tribal engagement team comes in and makes sure that the tribes are leading, that they are making decisions and then procuring resources as it suits them, not the other way around.
So let's get into the how a little bit around the Indigenous Power and Light Fund for Energy Sovereignty. You launched this fund last fall as a way to support tribes that want to take advantage of federal funding for renewable energy development. The funding totals around $14 billion in subsidies and incentives, which is an impressive number. What does that cover, and why still, despite that amount, does it still leave a formidable funding gap for tribes moving forward?
Yes. So that money is, I cried because of how much it was, but it's kind of bittersweet in a way, because there is a gap between what the federal funding pays for and what it costs to actually develop and deploy a clean energy project on tribal lands. And so this fund, we originally pitched it to all of our donor allies as an opportunity to unlock those billions of dollars. And it still can do that, because a lot of those dollars have been allocated. But now with a Trump administration and the uncertainty of what's going to happen to a lot of that funding, the donors were having these conversations. Okay, of the 30 million that we've raised thus far in this fund, and the 70 million we still have to raise, how is that going to be used if IRA goes away? Well, there's still plenty of opportunity and need, and it's the right thing to do to continue in this path towards a just transition. And so the funds can be used to build smaller projects versus feasibility studies and pre-development costs for larger utility scale. Let's do more smaller microgrids and things that still have major impact on a tribal community, and have the funding be used for that. And it really remains to be seen, right? Like, none of us know what's going to happen in terms of what's left from IRA.
And if I'm correct, you're raising the fund from philanthropic sources like the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, among others. Why are you targeting those sources for the fund? Is there something specific about them that makes them a great fit for this kind of work?
Great question. So MacArthur, Hewlett, Lemelson, they are our steadfast allies that have demonstrated trust-based philanthropy with us and others. they are examples of what equitable grant making looks like. And that right there is the impetus for us to partner with them first to establish the fund. We seek federal funds on behalf of tribes, and we help them apply for those funds, and we help them secure those funds. We run on philanthropy, and there's a couple reasons for that. First and foremost, I can't have us subjected to the whims of administrations, right? We need to have steady cash flow, and to give the tribes the confidence that we're always going to be here for them as long as we're needed. And the other reason is if I were to run on federal funding, I become a functionary of government. And part of our job is to hold government's hand to the fire when needed, and to be peers with them, and have these conversations on a level playing field. If I'm subservient to them and I'm their employee, I can't do that. And we're actively working with folks that we fully expect to be coming into the Trump administration to continue this, because clean energy is, it's considered a leftist liberal thing, but it's about economic development. It's about jobs. So we're going to see, I think, a more bipartisan approach to this work. And, the fund is we've done it with partners who we don't need to explain ourselves to. They get inherently the struggles the tribes have faced, why this is necessary, and they're putting up the money because they know it's the right thing to do. So the second tranches, third tranches of money, we're opening the eyes of impact investors, of private banks, of other flavors of investment, because it is good an investment opportunity to work with tribes. It's not easy, and that's part of the reason why we exist, to offer Pathways to Trust is a program that we offer to corporations and anyone else that wants to understand how to develop equitable partnerships with tribes, and to learn about how it's not business as usual. You don't walk into a tribal council chamber and speak as if you're in a boardroom in on Wall Street. It's very different. And so we serve that role as a service, yes, to protect the tribes, but also as a service to those that want to be in right relation, but don't yet know how.
One of the common themes that's been coming up on the show as of late is the complexity related to grid interconnections. I'm curious, from your perspective, talk about the expenses and complexities related to grid interconnections and what FERC could do to address those hurdles.
We have a really good relationship with FERC in this administration. Chairman Phillips and Nicole Sitaraman, who's director of the Office of Public Participation, and their staff have been so open and communicative and participatory in conversations about the burdens that currently exist in the system of interconnection. And we filed a petition in August requesting that FERC waive the interconnection fees in the way that they're currently requested to relieve that burden. And we've asked them to compare tribes to states in that regard, and that we have different indicators of commercial readiness than, say, an Ørsted or a Vestas or, a big company that wants to interconnect to the grid. These commercial readiness deposits are about speculation, and they're meant to eliminate the tire kickers in the queue that cause havoc when they decide, oh yeah, we're going to pull out that application, and that causes the whole pipeline of projects to have to be restudied to determine, where they fit in the supply and demand on the grid. Tribes are not speculating. When we come to the table and want to interconnect a project, it's because it is essential to our survival. It is to replace, for example, in the case of Hopi Nation, who we work very closely with, it's to replace their 85% of revenue that was lost when the Canton mine shut down. They need to replace that. So they're developing a 400 megawatt project. The interconnection fees were astronomical. And to preserve their place in the queue was, they needed to come up with $7.5 million. The tribe's annual budget is $16 million. So you're asking a tribe to compete with developers who have that $7.5 million in that little fifth pocket on the jeans, right? No, this is so the argument here is that we're not speculating. There are other indicia of readiness, everything from, signing a tribal resolution to, community engagement to having tribal historic preservation studies committed. If a tribe's going down that path, they're serious about it. They're not kicking tires.
I want to go back to something we talked earlier a little bit about funding gaps, and I'm kind of curious to get into some more specifics about that. What's the reason for some of those funding gaps? I mean, are the tribes not able to use money from the IRA? Are these interconnection fees part of that funding gap? Maybe talk through where some of the funding gap constraints are happening.
So when you look at the cost of developing a utility scale project, the federal dollars tend to cover about 80%. So pre-development costs are not covered by the majority of the federal funding programs, but they are essential to the project getting done. And they include things like engineering studies, feasibility studies, geographical studies, interconnection studies, tribal historic preservation studies. Those are the things that you can't even apply for some of this federal funding unless those studies have been completed to the satisfaction of the agency making the grants. And so that's why this fund was stood up, was to ensure that that wasn't a barrier for the tribes that, because it's like, Secretary Granholm at the Department of Indian Energy's conference last year stood up and said, "Hey, we're making another $300 million available, and isn't that great?" And I got a call from the Associated Press, and the reporter said, "Aren't you happy about this?" And I said, "Well, honestly, it's bittersweet because yes, it means more money is available, but once again, there's a gap. There's that delta between what it costs to build a project and what the feds are offering."
So last question for you, and we try and make it a fun one. We call this show With Great Power, which is obviously a nod to the energy industry. It's also a famous Spider-Man quote, "With great power comes great responsibility." So what superpower do you bring to the energy transition?
My superpower is being able to see across vast landscapes, literally and figuratively, and vast networks of human beings, and identifying people who have a skill set beyond my own. I am blessed to be surrounded by some really brilliant people, and our org is founded on the Mi'kmaq principle of Eduwaptamunk, which is two-eyed seeing, which is seeing through one eye the benefit of Indigenous wisdom and lifeways and knowledge and ways of being, and coupling that, through the other eye, seeing Western technology and resources, and being able to meld the two and be in right relation with one another. And that's not always easy. And so I find having that two-eyed seeing is part of that superpower. Thank you for asking that question.
Thank you very much. That was awesome. Well, Chéri, I really enjoyed our conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today.
Thank you, Brad.
Chéri Smith is the founder, president, and CEO of the Alliance for Tribal Clean Energy. With Great Power is produced by GridX in partnership with Latitude Studios. Delivering on our clean energy future is complex. GridX exists to simplify that journey. GridX is the enterprise rate platform that modern utilities rely on to usher in our clean energy future. We design and implement emerging rate structures, and we increase consumer investment in clean energy, all while managing the complex billing needs of a distributed grid. Our production team includes Aaron Hardick and Mary Catherine O'Connor. Ann Bailey is our senior editor. Stephen Lacey is our executive editor. Sean Marquand composed the original theme song and mixed the show. The GridX production team includes Jenny Barber, Samantha McCabe, and me, Brad Langley. If this show is providing value for you, and we really hope it is, we'd love it if you could help us spread the word. You can rate or review us at Apple and Spotify, or you can share a link with a friend, colleague, or the energy nerd in your life. As always, thanks for listening. I'm Brad Langley.